Hello again, everybody, and welcome to another episode of Fun and Games Podcast. I'm Geoff Moonen.
And I'm Matt, a.k.a. Stormageddon.
And you're listening to episode 104. And this episode, we wanted to talk a little bit about a mechanic within games that really couldn't happen back in, certainly Matt and my early days of gaming, and those are the consequences of choice, whether that is gameplay or socially between you and all of the other NPCs within the game, those sort of far-reaching consequences from the choices you make throughout.
Yeah, it's something that's definitely more common in modern games, but this idea, like at a very basic level, if you killed an NPC, you couldn't do that quest. You've ruined that relationship with that NPC because you've murdered them. In old games, you couldn't break outside the code that way. Like in Super Mario Brothers, you kill the bad guys, you save the princess. That's kind of it. Super basic.
Yeah, and there are things where if you break an aspect of the game, there's only so far you can break it in something like Super Mario Brothers. The most you can do is get to the minus world. And it has nothing to do with whether or not you killed too many Koopa Troopas or stomped on too many Goombas.
Yeah.
And sometimes some games, as things evolved, you could end up with sort of, there's consequences that are in-game and there are consequences that are literally in the game. Like, I know of an NPC within Morrowind, Elder Scrolls 3, who is the Thief Guild Master, whom through confluence of circumstances, you can kill. And you shouldn't be able to kill guild masters and quest givers, but you can here. And if you do, it's not a thing of like, you killed Ron, I hate you now. I don't remember the guy's name, I didn't play that far into the game, but I just know this through stories and hearsay. But it means you can't finish certain quests because literally they're not there anymore. Early games rarely had those points where you could do combat along with crucial bits of code like that to cause either an in-game what's called a soft lock, where your game is locked within software. It's not frozen, but you can't go anywhere. But there are moments now where not only are there built-in deep social aspects, whether it's open world games, RPGs, shooters, and action titles, but there's also matters and consequences that come about we as gamers behaving as we have learned to behave as gamers within a game over the last 50 years of games. The first three Mario Brothers, and most Mario games, your only language is violence. You stomp, you punch, you shoot, you kick, you throw. This is super great for early games because you didn't really have a lot of nuance in how they moved or how they could interact or anything. So you just destroy things, especially arcade games with high scores and everything else. You destroy, you break, you get points. And then you reach a point where just doing that, I'm an RPG protagonist. I can eat this guy's lunch right off the table because it refills my health and I need to fight Gato more so I can get silver points. And then there are consequences to that.
Yeah, the courtroom trial in Chrono Trigger is one of my earliest memories of consequences within a game socially. Stealing the lunch, returning the cat, checking in on Marley first before picking up her necklace, things like that affect that trial. And it's impossible to not get convicted, but it is possible to be found not guilty. You still get thrown in jail anyway because the story has to move forward. But those kinds of social interactions were a thing that I had no idea existed before that. And like, for sake of this conversation, we are suspending conversations about creating romantic relationships in games because we are going to have another episode after this with a special guest where we dive more deeply into that. This is sort of like an introduction to that. And I think what's fascinating is that a lot of these social parts of games do lead into the more romantic, both sexual and asexual side of things. Like, for example, those who know me know I have a Mass Effect podcast. In Mass Effect 2, the idea of a loyalty mission, a mission that you have to do and do successfully to make that crew member loyal to you, sure, it can lead to romance, but initially it's just so you know they will support you in the final suicide mission and likely survive, depending on your choices. And like Mass Effect 2 was one of the largest scale games I remember playing where going, oh shit, people can die? like permanently dead. I remember resetting the suicide mission so many times to pick the right choices because consequences mattered there. And doing those loyalty missions leading up for each of those characters mattered, so they would trust you, because this was more ragtag and mercenary related than the first game or the third game. And I think that kind of stuff is really fascinating. And a lot of games do it, but I feel like not enough games do it, or some games do it differently. And I'm always curious about those kinds of interactions, because the moment I see that a character can like that I did a thing, I go, well, what does that mean? What else do I have to do to make them like me? Oh, God, I want them to like me. Oh, God, do they not like me? You know, that's my brain just spirals out that way.
I know. As I'm somebody with all sorts of anxiety and rejection sensitivity and everything else. And so in real life interactions, I say a thing to very good friends, to lifelong friends. And I go, they hate me now, don't they? Oh, God, they hate me. I shouldn't talk to them. I should just bury myself up to my neck in the earth kind of thing. And then to put that into games, it's wonderful. It breathes so much life, and it also makes me hyperventilate.
Well, sure. Yeah, I mean, like even Dragon Age Inquisition, which is another BioWare game, takes it to the next level where certain things that you say will cause characters in your party or on your core team to like or dislike those things that you do. And when I first played Inquisition, I panicked every time I made someone I liked dislike me. Now, after subsequent playthroughs, I'm just like, you know, certain folks on the team can get effed if they don't agree with certain social and political responsibilities that I have as the Inquisitor, like mages should be free and not enslaved to the Templars. There is no budging on that. Period. Although, yes, I will accept that in Dragon Age 2, some mages make some questionable choices. That's not...
But those are individuals. That is not a sweeping statement.
Fair. But like when I first started to notice, like I would say a thing and then it goes, Cassandra disliked that. I went, shit, I like Cassandra. What did I know? I don't want to, you know, it's a different way of interacting with games, because in early, again, like we were saying before, in early shooters and RPGs, it was very easy, like kill the bad guy, shoot the alien, do the thing and move on. But as games got more complicated, there were social effects, you know, and like there are tons of other games outside even action and RPG that have those kinds of effects. And I think it's really interesting, you know, getting dogs to like you in certain games, or getting, you know, having companions. Like in the Fable series, you can romance, but you can also get characters to like want to join your cause or like you or dislike you. If you're evil as hell in Fable, the townspeople talk shit about you constantly to your face about how evil you are.
And Fable is such an interesting series as far as consequence and choice goes. I remember when they were first advertising the very first Fable, they were talking about how all of your choices, every little thing you do has far-reaching consequences. I think the story that they went with was, if you find an acorn, you can plant the acorn, and at the end of the game, there will be an oak where it stood. And you can come back and check on its growth. There were no acorns in the game. But also, Fable is such a weird one because it's got the width of an ocean and the depth of a puddle.
Yeah, I mean, part of that is also because Peter Molyneux would always promise the world. And I genuinely believe that Peter Molyneux was not doing this insidiously. I think that he really did want to promise that you could fight a dragon and that you could have far-reaching consequences, and then the technology would limit it. I feel like now in the current console generation, and there is rumors of a new Fable coming at some point for the Xbox,
yes,
that Peter Molyneux, everything that he envisioned, we could actually probably bring to light now. But yeah, that was very true. Is like in the marketing for those games, they promised the kinds of things that we do get to do in other games, but it wasn't really there in Fable. It was pretty binary. By Fable 2 and 3, especially 3, there were definitely more choices. In Fable, I think it's the third one, is one of my favorites in the series. It's hard. They all blur together because the overarching narrative of the Fable games are not that memorable. It's the smaller interactions that are really memorable. But I remember loving those games because of the promise of what you could do. They ultimately fell short, but they still stay in a good place. I think also the problem is Mass Effect, for those who know me, is on a pedestal in a real way, acknowledging that there are still issues within it. And so it's hard to live up to that. And like the Dragon Age series has come close, especially in my recent replay, especially from a social aspect and making friendships. Like my pinnacle for best frienddom mostly because you also have no choice in Dragon Age, is with Varric, the rogue dwarf in the second and third games, because you can't romance him. You're just not allowed, which people have issue with. And like, I do think he'd be an interesting romantic partner, but I kind of like that there's this one character, at least, that's locked, that you cannot ever have a romance with, because not everyone owes you romance. And I think Varric is such a good depiction of what a best friend is like in games, especially for me, because he's snarky, he cracks jokes, but he also is humble sometimes, and he will get emotional with you. And I like seeing those developments in games. And I think that in the early days of gaming, it was a lot of mechanically, you get a high score with this one character, or like you earn extra hearts with this one character. And it becomes deeper as games evolve and as games grow. And that's not to say you can't develop relationships socially with characters without it being a mechanic. But I think when we can affect it, it becomes more interesting. We're engaging in a different way than if it's just part of the plot machine.
Right. And it is a weird tightrope to walk in terms of narrative benefits versus mechanical benefits. Raising your social experience with someone, the idea of romancing someone to get a certain thing, or you want everybody to like you because you want all of the benefits of what they can do. It's a weird sort of thing of, well, Matt, you were saying it before. You wanted everyone in Dragon Age to like you, but you also want to stand by your convictions because this is a game that has moral choices, and some of the things people agree or disagree with you aren't just, well, what kind of ale do you like, or do you prefer red or white wine, or, you know, axes or swords? This is important, damn it. But
the answer is swords, by the way.
Yes. Axes have their place, but
they do.
It just in a vacuum.
We're just gonna get a list of angry comments of like, F you, I love axes.
Axe Squad, come at me. But anyway, Axe Gang, there we go. Ooh, Kung Fu Hustle. Ooh, tangent. But the thing is, there are the big social moral choices that need to be made, and that's not whether or not you can enjoy the mechanical benefits of these digital companions in much the same way as in life. People and friends and acquaintances and associates aren't just what you can get from them or what they can get from you. You are still yourself. And that's an interesting sort of meta moral within like social games. But I also enjoy when you can't actually please everybody. It does get at me. And it does eat away at me at that need to be liked all the time. I'm very John Mulaney. I need everyone at all times to like me. It's exhausting. But I think of probably one of the earliest that I can think of. I know it's probably not, but what could be called a social choice? Castlevania 3 for the NES. You are once again one of the Belmonts, Trevor Belmont this time, star of the Netflix series. And as you go through the game, there are certain bosses that when you beat them, they unlock a potential companion. Whether it is Grant Dynasty, the wall-climbing pirate, Sypha Belnades, the mage, or Alucard. And when you beat them, and it's like, hey, cool, you're fighting Dracula? I'm fighting Dracula. Want to do it together? And you can choose yes or no. Just because you find them doesn't mean they automatically join your party. And you can only have one of them with you throughout the game. There's maybe the main difference in story is at the end of the game, they're standing next to Trevor when when the castle collapses. But other than that, it's just, well, you pick one of them and you gain the benefits of what they do, but you can't have all of them. You can't bring everybody. And there are some RPGs that came later that did that. I know some of the Star Ocean games, because you have one person in your party. It's, well, I either dislike them personally or I have a fundamental issue with what they do. I'm not joining you. You can't have all the characters. And I think when you design it so that you can't get 100% like that, it becomes a lot easier to build the narrative with the NPCs and with yourself. I definitely, when I play RPGs, even if my character has a defined personality, when I get to make dialogue choices, when I get to make companion choices, I also am filling in the narrative of those characters and building that. And when it's sort of you can't get the whole tree. Sometimes the branch is cut off. You're like, okay, cool. I'm going to make the choices I want to make. Or I'm going to play this game and I'm going to try to make different choices and then feel really bad about being evil and then make the choices I want to make anyway.
Sure. I mean, well, and also like an extreme example on the other end of Castlevania 3 is Bloodstained Curse of the Moon 1. You can recruit everybody. You get that choice at the end of every fight. You know, you get rescued or someone joins in and you could choose to kill them or let them join you. And if you let them join you, you know, the story progresses one way. If you kill them all, you gain power-ups just for you instead of being able to switch characters. And that also results in a different ending. And like on the Chrono Trigger side about making choices in RPGs, we talked about the courtroom scene before. I remember when I played Chrono Trigger for the first time, it was lent to me by my friend Roy. Shout out to Roy if you still listen to the podcast. And I thought he said, you fight Magus 3 times, and on the 3rd time, you get to choose him as an ally. What he had actually said is, you fight Magus twice, and on the 2nd time, you have to choose not to fight him, and then he'll join you. I made that mistake, and so on the 2nd fight with Magus, I said, no, let's fight. And I'm like, all right, great, we're going to fight, and then he's going to join me. And then I killed him. And I was very upset as he quickly became my favorite character. And so I finished that playthrough without him. And then I went back and did it the right way and got to recruit him. But that's one of those social choices that now every time I play Chrono Trigger after that, unless I'm going for a very specific ending, I never kill Magus because he's the best character in the entire game. Fight me, internet. And so I won't kill him. You know, it's interesting how those kind of social choices get ingrained in your brain. And it's funny too, you mentioned dialogue choices. Like, I never played Mass Effect as if I were Shepard in previous playthroughs before Reignite. I think a lot of my choices aligned morally with me, but I did definitely take some renegade action, shooting several people or blowing several things up that I might not actually take. When playing for Reignite, though, and MJ and I deciding we are these Shepards, we have to make choices as we would, I was surprised at some of the choices I made. And like when the Legendary Edition comes out, or depending on when this comes out, is already out, we're banked very far ahead, folks.
Yeah.
Because the creation options have been improved to a degree, I may start with a male Shep, even though femme Shep is my preference, because if I can make Shepard look even more like me, I might be more inclined to try and pursue that experience again, while still making some different choices, romancing different people. Like, I've yet to ever romance Tali, which I feel like is just a giant mistake at this point, and I aim to rectify. Also, this is probably more for the next episode, but Tali is queer, Cassandra is queer. BioWare has a problem with making these characters who are clearly bisexual and making them straight, and it's a problem. That's my soapbox.
It's the difficulty of when you have zeros and ones, you know, binary choices just seem very obvious when they're not.
Right, of course. Yeah, but you can't look at Cassandra with her short hair and her tough girl attitude and be like, this is a straight woman. It's not possible. Sorry.
Maybe she just likes that, but we can read the codes here. We know this.
But, you know, I think that what's really interesting about the social side of stuff also is that in a lot of games, social leads to romance, but it doesn't always have to. And I like when it diverges. Like, a lot of folks I know view Garrus Vicarian from Mass Effect as boyfriend material. And I get it. And I even romanced him as my femme Shep once. But to me, because I've played a lot of male Shep recently, he's the best friend. He's the bro. He's my dude. He's my guy, you know? And I like that there is social pursuit there, and that it doesn't, at least in the 3rd game, doesn't feel ham-fisted if you're not in a relationship. There is social construction for the best friend path as well. I think also, shifting gears a bit, social gameplay doesn't have to be the mechanics itself to a degree. What do I mean by that? Look at one of the most popular games over the last year and a half, Among Us. Among Us is a social game where you make social choices to murder or not murder your friends or strangers. That game is all social cues. And if you are a bad liar in real life, you will be a bad liar in that game.
Mm-hmm.
And it will show. But that's part of the fun of this game, where you're trying to convince people that you are what you're not, one way or another.
It's true, yeah. And because the game design doesn't have to quantify NPC reactions, and because it is such a small space or a small realm in its way, and that's not an insult, that's actually quite a compliment, because, well, I said Fable before is an ocean-sized puddle. when you create a smaller arena, you are able to make the choices deeper. You almost have a certain amount of area to work with based on what your project can do. And you can go even deeper when you don't have to deal with NPC reactions or anything else. You just let people be people. And fantastic, beautiful, strange moments come out of that. You get all those cool stories of an Among Us game. It's why there's so many great clips and everything else of weird moments that have happened to people, because the human element is very unpredictable, predictably unpredictable.
And I mean, even other games that treat social stuff in a different way, like your Phoenix Wrights, where social cues help you solve cases, or even this is a newer game called, I believe it's pronounced Nausea. It's essentially a single player visual novel Among Us, where you're on this crew on a ship, I believe, and like people are dying and you're trying to figure out who the killers are. But it's a deduction game totally based in game mechanics and not based in social interaction in real time, which is, I've heard, phenomenal. I have yet to play it, unfortunately, but that would fit into this idea too, right? This idea that the mechanics aren't combat, it's social mechanics instead. And I think, of course, the biggest proponent of that, at least in recent years, has been Phoenix Wright. This idea that you have to find clues and read what the defendant is saying, or trying to figure out based on clues what to use as evidence in the court cases. If it's clear, I have not actually played any of the Phoenix Wright games, though I do aim to rectify that at some point. But like this idea that social cues can also affect game mechanics in a way that has nothing to do with combat, has nothing to do with battles in the traditional violence sense even.
Agreed. A game that is similar to that I'm in the camp of, I haven't played it yet, I've heard some stuff about it, I aim to play it soon, is one that actually came out not too long ago, I want to say. It came out actually in September of 2020, Paradise Killer.
Oh, yes. Mm-hmm.
Which is a game where you are an investigator on some strange, weird island called Paradise, and you don't have a very clear trail of talk to this person, find this piece of evidence, do this thing. It's very much explore, talk, build relationships. You try to piece together these clues, and because, it's not getting back alley fights to get informants, I don't think. There is, again, I might be, talking out of the wrong end here, but because, like you were saying with Phoenix Wright, where there are games where it almost feels like the sophistication of social mechanics, they can enter into RPGs and action games in terms of, yes, but why are you shooting so many people? Why are you cutting down so many? And is this the only way to solve this conflict? I think investigation games and visual novels are an interesting, maybe not visual novels as much, but kind of adding social mechanics to puzzle games in sort of like spot the difference kinds of games and pattern recognition. What does happen if I destroy all of these blocks? Well, you've solved the murder case. Okay, how do we go about that? How do we find our pieces? And one of the reasons why we're doing essentially a two-parter about social mechanics within games is the fact that that has kind of become the du jour topping on a lot of games coming out these days. Open world games are kind of the genre of the decade for console games, and it's making its way onto PC games as well. But visual novel is kind of at the end of the genre word salad that a lot of games have these days, big and small. They have visual novel aspects, which is sort of shorthand for you can make choices in social situations that have far-reaching consequences. It's not a matter of if everybody you kill in Metal Gear Solid 3 will show up as a ghost during that one encounter. It's a matter of, like in Dragon Age, you say something, they will remember this, and stuff will happen to it. And it's very interesting to see all of the different ways that it's coming out and what happens when you apply that to different genres across gaming.
For sure. And I feel like there are games that started out not having it that have grown to have it. And I don't want to say that our conversation next episode will only be romantic. I think love is love, right? And we're going to talk about all versions of it. But like the borderline of what growing love in a game is like is when you're talking about companionship with pets or animals. And like, we'll probably talk about this in the next episode too, but like the Pokemon games, a game series that anyone who's been listening knows Geoff and I love very much, in recent years, in the last couple of gens, have had a mechanic to camp or feed your Pokemon and pet them and play with them and grow that relationship outside of leveling them up, and often will affect how they level up. You know, if your Pokemon really likes you and you have a good, strong, loving relationship with it, it will perform better in battle to one way or another. And that's something that Pokemon didn't have in the beginning and didn't really have any hint of in the beginning. And as the games grew and the technology got better, they added those kinds of things. As of when we're recording this, we haven't gotten more information on it yet, but we are facing a re-release, a remake of Diamond and Pearl. I'm curious if they're going to incorporate those mechanics. They may not. They haven't in some, and they have in others. Mm-hmm. But, you know, I think it's interesting that Pokemon were in the beginning, I don't really think thought of as pets, because it was very much the battling of it, and that has its complicated social and political aspects. But I was recently, as of when we're recording, a guest on Cutscenes, which is a video game movie podcast, and we were talking about Detective Pikachu and how there's a brief line in the very beginning when Justice Smith is trying to catch a Cubone where his best friend yells, "Remember, it has to choose you too," which kind of reframes the idea of capturing these animals, that they're also choosing you, and it's a mutual relationship. And I think adding a game mechanic in the later games where you can play with them, let them out of their Pokeballs, feed them, hang out with them, aids that. Because before it just was like, yeah, I'm carrying all these animals around in balls, I don't care about them, you know. And I think the overall narrative of Pokemon has grown and strengthened because of adding social mechanics like that.
Yeah, I think Pokemon is a really good case study in terms of how social mechanics have evolved. No pun intended on that. Because friendship was, or affection, I guess, I'm not sure exactly what they called it. It was a stat even in Red and Blue. It was in the original game. But really the only place I can think of that it affected things was there are two moves, Return and Frustration. They are normal type physical moves that their power is based on that Pokemon's affection level towards you. Return grows more powerful the more they like you. Frustration, you can guess. You know, the less they like you, the stronger it is. They can take out their anger. Sure. And then in Generation 2, you were able to evolve certain Pokemon only when their friendship levels were high enough. And that's how they introduced new evolutions. Espeon and Umbreon were friendship evolutions based on time of day. You know, Eevee being a way that, you know, whenever they make new ones going, and here's a new mechanic we put in the generation. And you're right, whether Pokemon and Me, whether it's the camping, whether it's any of those, that has grown and changed, and stuff has come and gone. And still at the end of the day, they are still those digital Pokemon, and they look very much the same as the other ones. But they're, even when it was Red and Blue, we formed bonds with these Pokemon, even without having points saying you're doing good, you're not doing good. Pokemon Yellow gave us Pikachu following us, and whenever you talk to him, he had different expressions and different sounds based on how happy he was, which was the first outward sign of it. But they didn't even need to have that. I cared about those Pokemon. We named them, we trained them. When we trade them away, when they evolved, if they fell in battle, we'd feel so bad about it. And it wasn't even anything permanent, but we cared. And then they added more to the game. So it's an interesting push and pull of, like I was saying before, narrative consequences versus mechanical consequences.
For sure. And Pokemon even evolved beyond that. Again, no pun intended.
It's there.
They had Tamagotchi Pokemon, and then they also had Hey You Pikachu, which was a nightmare and a terrible game. But
yes,
the core concept was if you spoke into the microphone, Pikachu would react, and you get Pikachu to like you and do certain things. You know, it's even in our episode with Josh Silverman when we were talking about point-and-click adventure games, I brought up the curse that is the New Adventures of Pac-Man or Pac-Man 2, whatever the hell it was called for the Genesis, where if Pac-Man liked you, he did better and performed better and would find the things that you were looking for most of the time when the mechanics cooperated. But if he didn't like you, if he was pissed at you, if you kept hitting him with stuff or tripping him or knocking him over, he wouldn't listen. He would do whatever the hell he wanted. And so like even that is forming a bond with this character and really made you feel like you weren't Pac-Man. You were some omnipotent being influencing Pac-Man, which is wild.
You were that asshole. Well, in the same way that, actually, you just made me think of this. One of my favorite things to do in playing classic Warcraft is not playing Warcraft. I'm not good at those games. But one of my favorite things is clicking on any of the units too many times.
Yeah.
Because you click on them, they acknowledge you. You click on them again, maybe they've got another acknowledgement line they go through a few. After 4 or 5 clicks, they start getting annoyed. And Warcraft 1, they had some generalized one because I think every unit had the same general human sound about things. And the orcs, same. And then Warcraft 2, every unit had a different voice and they all had different clips, whether they were individual units, whether they were flying, whether they were ships, whether they were whatever it was. And I just wanted to annoy them. I didn't need to win the war. I just wanted to annoy the armies. And there's no mechanical back and forth on that. They don't not listen to you if you've clicked on them 10 times. If you give them an order, they don't even have a follow-up line of, good, finally, orders, thank you. It just goes on. Whereas a game, I don't know if this is social consequence or what, but it is a thing of affection, is the game Odama, the pinball strategy game that is, I played it for the first time last year while quarantined, and I'm going to get back to it, but it is ridiculous. It's a pinball game where you are in feudal Japan fighting off opposing armies with the power of the Odama, which is the giant pinball. And you have your armies to help push things along, move the flippers, take enemy flippers so that you can use them and move onwards. And you yell commands to make that happen. So you have to yell into the microphone attached to your controller now. So that's weird. But the thing is, depending on how you're doing, how effective your commands are or anything else, morale rises and falls. And so they don't just listen to you, they judge you as a commander. And if it gets low enough and you're like, push forward, no, we're dying, screw you, I'm saving myself. And you have to then have more successes or recruit more troops or anything else. And you have a limited number to pull from. And I don't know how much more they could get in terms of social stuff, but that's the most social mechanics I've ever seen in a goddamned pinball game. So that's where that lands.
Yeah, I mean, and also fun fact about what you brought up about Warcraft. One of my favorite things about World of Warcraft is also if you click on NPCs too many times, they eventually get frustrated with you. And that is the wildest carryover from a previous game. And I love that it exists. One of the more important social relationship games that we've not brought up is real-time strategy, especially your Civilization games first come to mind, like the Red Alert games and StarCraft and stuff. You know, we hinted on this with Warcraft. There wasn't a ton of it, but when you get to the Civ games, it's bartering, making treaties, giving gifts, chatting up other dignitaries. Like, it's a whole different kind of social management through politics, as real, I guess, as video game politics can get. And that always has been really fascinating to me, because when I first started playing the Civilization games, it was very much, I'm just going to fight this army with this army, and then we're going to conquer them and move on. You know, the American colonization that we are all too familiar with. And like, when the Civ games got more advanced, you could do more different things while building treaties and giving gifts and interacting, having conversations, making choices. And I think that's really interesting and shifts those games to not just boil down to conquering and moving on. And we haven't even talked about The Sims yet either, which, yes, you can have romances in The Sims also, but it is also helpful for The Sims to like each other just to get along and interact with each other. I think Sim games and games like Civilization, which is not the same kind of Sim, but a different kind of Sim, it also incorporates these mechanics to grow these relationships, that, yes, again, can ultimately lead to romance, but don't have to. Romance of the Three Kingdoms also is another strategy game that I think of often that I loved on console, that is dealing with a lot of balancing traditions and learning to get along and not just going to war with everyone. And I think that's really interesting too. And some games have done it better, some games have done it worse.
Or whether effectively, ineffectively, or if they are able to put the social mechanics throughout the gameplay. Because there is a certain amount of, in my experience of games like Civilization, I haven't played a lot of the later 4X games because I lose enough of my time to other genres of games.
That's fair.
I've gone on record on that. But I feel like there's, okay, develop these things, fight these things, do this stuff. Okay, now it's time for the diplomacy screen. Let's make some choices here, which is fine. It's great. But I think the effectiveness of having the reach of these choices is when you can kind of break that up and mix them together. I don't necessarily want to say homogenize it. You can have rises and falls of like, okay, here's a very social thing you can do. Here's a not so social. Here's a whatever. But when you have it throughout and it's not a, all right, we're going to stop. We're going to go into a completely different screen on this one. And some games can make that work. This isn't a thing of they can or cannot, but I feel like this developing aspect of game design is more effective, or it has more reaching consequences when that can happen. I do want to name drop the Persona series in this episode. I do want to talk about it a lot more next episode, but I definitely feel like right now I'm currently playing through Persona 5. I finished Persona 3 a little while ago. We've talked about that. And I skipped 4, not because I'm not interested, but because Sarah and I are playing through Persona 5 together. And that's one that I have Persona 3 and 4 on my Vita. 5, we can actually play on the TV together. And so I don't know how many things have changed from 3 to 4 and then 4 to 5, but there are some very incredible night and day changes that have happened in terms of what your social links or confidants mean, who they can be, how they can be, and whether things have to be romance or not. And that's one of the reasons why I want to save it for next week. But I do want to point out that that is also a game where it encourages you to have a diverse social life, have a rich connection with lots of different people for lots of different reasons. It's kind of cool.
Yeah, I think that it's really fascinating how a lot of modern games have taken this and done different things with it. I think also we haven't even touched on survival games and the idea that you can do social things within those games without any dialogue or very little. You know, Valheim and Minecraft come to mind. Like in Minecraft, you could kill pigs, kill cows, kill wolves, kill animals for meat and for materials. Or you could use sugar cane or hay and corral a bunch of them, and then they will make smaller ones, and then you can farm the food, which, you know, ultimately you're still killing them, but you're using this social aspect of training or luring and being able to make more instead of just doing one-to-one, do the damage, get the meat, make the food, that kind of thing. And then in Valheim, like, I mostly played with friends. And so not only is there the social aspect outside of the game mechanics of working with your friends to build a village, but again, you can train wolves to guard your sanctuary. You can lure animals like boars and then farm them. It's this idea of building a world socially within this game, within the mechanics and the way they're designed, but still thinking outside the box from just the one-to-one play game, kill thing, get thing, move on.
Right. And something that maybe this has already happened or already started and we just haven't seen it yet, or like, as in you and I haven't seen it yet, but I'm interested in is a lot of these social aspects have to deal with interpersonal relationships, whether with people or with animals, but with other living things like that. But where are games where there are changes to the environment based on choices we make? We have games like Minecraft and things that have come after, and the things that the shoulders it stands on in terms of, yeah, you can dig this up, you can get these things, you can make this stuff, you're destroying the environment to build up new environment, but that is the point of the game. Those are Lego games, and those are cool as hell. Love them. But There are all sorts of games where like in Valheim, like in Dragon Age, like in all sorts of games with farming or crafting, yes, NPC animals can spawn and be trained and come and go. But how often do you dig up a mineral and then you can't get any more of it? How often can you harvest a tree and it doesn't grow again? Or have those sorts of far-reaching consequences of mining things for their mechanical benefit, and then there's only so much of it that can happen. And I feel like I was saying before about you can't make a very wide game with that, certainly not yet. But we are also looking at generated content, something like Valheim, where it's not a singular world. It's a seeded world that is randomly generated. What happens when it's, well, there's only so much iron, there's only so much gold. And with farming and with training, when can you cultivate? And when you throw in the social aspect of either NPCs or other players, when does it become a thing of like, no, please don't cut down all of the trees, we need some of those. And climate change is a big conversation right now, well outside of the realm of video games, and there can be thoughts on that. Because it is, I'm sure there are games out there that tackle this, and I'd love to know about them. I really do. And I hope that that becomes an easier thing to see as the language of design of social mechanics deepen.
Sure. And I think that like we're touching on a separate topic of survivability in games and when does that become detrimental and how much does it reflect the real world. But like, I think I'd be remiss if while talking about social interactions in games, if I didn't mention Animal Crossing, and specifically Animal Crossing New Horizons, which as far as I know doesn't have limited resources. I think trees can grow even if you don't plant seeds, but I don't recall. Someone who's more versed in Animal Crossing will correct me. But like even the other characters on the island, as far as I can tell in all of the Animal Crossing games, you can't have romantic relationships, but you can give gifts to the villagers and they will like you depending on the gifts you give them. They'll even wear the gifts that you give them, especially in the new game, if it's a wearable item. But like, I think that's also interesting because in Animal Crossing, it's distilled down to its basest form, I think, where it's just kindness and friendship. And like, if you're mean to villagers, they'll leave. They'll leave your island. They'll leave your town, you know. For example, for me personally, I haven't played my Animal Crossing New Horizons in many months, maybe 6 months, maybe more. And like, I have social anxiety that has no reality based in the game, that if I go back to the game, my villagers will all be like, where have you been? What'd you do? Where'd you go? Which doesn't happen. They'll say they missed you or that, you know, ask you where you've been, but like there is no actual pressure in the game. You can jump back in, but my own social anxieties affect me from going back to the game. That, and I'm playing a ton of other stuff. But like, also I think social interaction is really interesting and goes beyond even. So a game I'm playing right now as of when we're recording is as folks know, I've been making my way through the Yakuza series in order, starting from 0. And I'm currently on Yakuza 3, which is the PS3 game that was remastered for the PS4. And the whole beginning of that game, Kiryu, the main character, is running an orphanage. So there's a lot of conversation. There's a lot of hanging out with these kids, playing games with them, teaching them lessons. And like, that's an interesting social thing because there are some mechanics involved, but most of it is pretty narrative. There's some deductive, finding an item, getting a thing. But it's another way of social interaction that we haven't really talked about, is interacting with children or being a mentor. And like, ultimately, this is a game about, you know, real estate and the Yakuza and some pretty deep and dramatic stuff. But there's some levity in these early moments of this game. I think I'm up to chapter 5. There's a lot of time in those first 4 chapters where you're just giving off big dad vibes and helping these kids and teaching them. And it's really cool. And it's a social thing that I didn't even think, like, will I be a parent someday? The jury's still out on that. But I have nephews, I have nieces, and I know what it's like to mentor and teach. I have younger friends who I consider almost like children, like, you know, that I've helped and guided. And so like, I think that seeing this in a game was something that like as a kid, I'd probably be like, ew, why? This is boring. I want to punch stuff. Whereas an adult now, I'm like, aw, I just taught them about like why it's not nice to steal and why you should ask for permission before doing something or touching someone. Like it's a really cool thing to see in a game that I hadn't really thought much about until I started replaying the Yakuza series, or not replaying, playing for the first time the Yakuza series.
There's almost a weird sort of, I do all of the things I do for this. There are games that are like, oh, you now have a customizable space, so things you do allow you to make that customizable space better. But there are others where, yeah, it's I'm doing this for the orphans. I'm doing this to help these people out. And whether that is you choose whether to do illegal or legal acts, violent or non-violent acts, but those also are an interesting mechanical and narrative fulcrum from which you can then make further choices because it gives you something to care about. That doesn't quite come out right. But yeah, having an in-game thing that doesn't need to say, you're supposed to care about this. No, you play it and you go, I care about this. I want these people to like me, not just because I get items from them, but because I want them to like me, because I care about them and I want nice things to happen to them, to these digital people.
For sure. I mean, also, I think any game that preaches general human decency is very welcome, and not enough games do that.
You're here.
You know, previous guest of the show, Rebecca Valentine, often talks about nonviolent games, and it's not like she doesn't like to play violent games, but she likes to lift up nonviolent games because you can make an interesting game without killing people. And we've talked about plenty of them on this show, and we will continue to. And again, this is not from I don't like violent games. I like the carnage in Doom and Doom Eternal as much as the next guy, ripping a demon in half with my bare hands. Hell, in the new Suicide Squad trailer, when, although it won't be new by the time this airs, when King Shark ripped a person in half, I giggled with glee because it looked awesome. But that doesn't mean that that's the only form of entertainment I want. I think with anything else, especially while talking about social games, it's a balance, right? You know, figuring out what in that balance drives you to want to do these games. Look, if we want to talk about social relationships in games, the clouded social relationship in Shadow of the Colossus, where you don't even know the relationship between the young male hero and the young woman he's trying to save. But then in the predecessor, Ico, you are dragging this young girl all over the world as a young boy in a horned helmet, and you barely know what the relationship is there also. But there's a lot of hand-holding and guiding, and none of that is romantic. That is also all social, trying to solve puzzles, trying to move through the space.
And those are things where with nonverbal cues, we glean so much from the personality of these characters. It's not even a thing where we are projecting personality onto blank slates in strategy games where you have armies and you're like, well, that guy, I've been streaming Final Fantasy Tactics a little while back on my Twitch stream, and there's a character that I never brought into battle, and I dismissed all of my other generic units, but because the names are randomly picked, randomly generated, it was a squire named Voltaire, and I just went, I like you. I don't need you in battle. And so I just started saying, well, he's important. He makes the coffee. An army needs that. And so it just kind of became a thing. It wasn't a big deal, but there was nothing. This character has no dialogue. Their sprite looks no different from any other male generic character, but I just projected that onto him. You make the coffee. You're important, you're a confidant, you're cool. Voltaire, you're all right.
Yeah, I mean, well, also, you know, speaking to RPGs and tactical games, we've got Project Triangle Strategy on the horizon, but the predecessor, Octopath Traveler, which I absolutely loved, and I'm so glad that it's on PC, it's on Game Pass now. So if you haven't played Octopath Traveler, play it. But what's great about that game is you pick which of the 8 characters you start as, and then the story goes.
Mm-hmm.
And all the stories resolve in their own way, but you get to pick where the story goes. And then also, as you build up affinity with the other 8 party members, as you gather them, you get one-on-one conversations with the characters where they interact and they grow and they learn about each other. And it's not required. I don't even think you have to have those conversations. You can probably ignore them, I think. But they are not only just flavor, but like it builds the bonds of these characters. It also builds the greater narrative. While I wish they were more integrated to the overarching story, I like that they're isolated because it just gives you this moment out of time so you can get to know these characters better. And they are all really well-written characters. God, I'm going to end up playing Octopath Traveler again, I think. Because Lord knows I have so much time to play so many games.
So much time.
And I like that in Octopath Traveler, it just is about these 8 people who learn from each other and decide to work together to accomplish each other's goals. And when you resolve all 8 of their stories, the game itself also ends. And I think there's an overarching story tying them together, but not a huge one. I think for the most part, they're all driven by their individual stories. And some of those individual stories affect the other stories. It's been a while since I've played it, so it's hard to remember all the details. But I think that it endlessly fascinates me how games draw you in, and when they go beyond just click button, blow up head, it really broadens how we can empathize and interact with these characters. You can empathize through violent acts and through the idea that, again, in the core game of Super Mario Brothers, you are murdering mushrooms and turtles to save a princess. And you can relate to a character that way. But I feel personally the more dynamic way to do it is through social nonviolent cues that are really interesting and have, spanned a variety of games in different ways.
It's very true. And as the landscape expands and as design evolves, there will still be a place for games like Doom. Because as well, there's been a lot of talk with pandemic and quarantine and gaming sheltering and everything else. There was a thing of a lot of people turning to games like Animal Crossing and having that sort of comfort gaming. And then there's just, man, I just feel really good while playing Doom right now. I'm really enjoying I don't want to go out and commit violent acts, but I'm finding it zen and meditative to just pick up the shotgun and go bananas. It meets a different need. It meets a different comfort. I think there was an infamous review of the original Doom back in 94 or something that was kind of this is the only language we know with them, violence. Maybe one day we can reach out a hand of friendship to these demons, but we can't do that right now. And maybe there are games that let us do that now, and there definitely are. There are so many games where you can make friends and more with demons because the internet. But there are places for those violent games. There are places for entirely non-violent games. And yes, those are big statements. But there's all of those fun nuances that we were talking about here that, I definitely want to see how social mechanics can live in a hyper-violent game and still let it be the game that it is, as well as non-violent games, as well as cooking games, as well as puzzle, rhythm games, all sorts of RPGs, and the ways that, like Octopath Traveler, like Saga Frontier, how the stories you choose help each other. Or something as simple as, I was looking this up while we've been talking, I wanted to make sure I got the NPC right. There is, in the MMO EverQuest, there is an NPC, because there's a deep faction system within that game, like many MMOs, but there is a particular NPC that just talking to him lowers your faction with that temple. You're at the temple of the fire god, Seleucid Row. And if you go to the Ifriti named Tazgar, and if you hit the hail button, the literal hello button, and that if you talk to certain NPCs, initiates a quest or a conversation, she's just like, who are you? You're beneath my notice. You have taken a massive hit. If you say hi to him enough, he murders you.
Amazing.
That's not a deep social mechanic, but there's something.
I think ultimately, we're looking for how we can interact with games. And the important part of this conversation on fun and games is the different ways we interact. And in the next episode, we are going to bring my co-host on Reignite, the incredible MJ Frankie Bradley Lestrange, to talk more about the farthest end of this, which is the romance side in all its forms. And not every game has to lead to romance, but when it does, what games do it well and what games don't do it well, and what's the in-between, and what are the best ways to do it, and why aren't there enough queer ones?
Absolutely.
Which we'll probably yell about a lot.
Next episode, we can talk about the Persona series. We can talk about Fire Emblem. We can get a little deeper into some of what BioWare's been brewing and doing for the last couple of series.
Yes. But with that said, as always, we want to know what y'all think. Are there certain games or social mechanics that you really dig? Ways you develop friendships in games? Friendships you've developed with characters just through your own affinity for those characters without any mechanics? Please let us know. We want to hear from you. Also, I'd be remiss if I didn't ask, if you're listening to this podcast and you have yet to give us a 5-star review and write up on your podcast platform of choice, please do. Apple Podcast is the preferred one because it helps us to reach more listeners. But if you have a different platform that allows for a review, please write one there. Also, feel free to reach out on social media. Also, since we haven't been lately, I would like to give an opportunity for both myself and Geoff to promote the streaming we've been doing. I stream at DJ_Stormageddon over on Twitch. I've become a featured streamer for Harmonix and Fuser, which is pretty rad.
Yeah, it is.
I've been streaming it almost every week with them, usually Monday or Tuesday night. It's a dance party. It's a lot of fun. Come hang out. And then I've been spending my Sundays playing another game. As of when we're recording, it's Hades, but that it might evolve into me playing through another series. I've been wanting to replay Doom and Halo, so we'll see. But again, check me out at DJ_Stormageddon on Twitch. But Geoff, you also have been streaming quite a bit as well.
Yes, I have. I stream under Not Geoff at All, Jeff. And I have mostly these days been playing some more retro classic games. I play PS1 games on Thursdays. I've played through Final Fantasy Tactics. I've played through a bunch of other random games. I like doing longer form RPGs as well as some of the stranger games because the PS1 is one of my favorite consoles, one of my favorite generations because of its oddity and just its everywhereness. And on Fridays, I've started a series that I call Friday Fantasy, where I am playing through every mainline numbered game in the Final Fantasy series. I've yet to get to the problem of what do I do about the MMOs. We'll cross that bridge in like 2 years when I get there. I am also doing the small sequels and spin-offs within those games themselves. So if and when I get to Final Fantasy IV, that will be the whole thing, the interquel, the after years, etc. Because it's a series I love, and it's one where there are lots of favorites, and I like hearing about other people's favorite moments within the games while we play them, and it's just a celebration of a series I love. And I do other random, some indie PC gaming and what have you, other times throughout the week. But those are the two big ones at twitch.tv/notjeff at all.
Also, for the record, the most recent Final Fantasy MMO, I believe 14, is free to play up until a point. So
yes, it is.
Just throwing that out there. Not that you need that on your conscience and eating your time, but I figured I'd let you know.
Oh, it's there. It's there. No, and I'm having fun looking at playing through these games and being like, oh, that's the first appearance of this. Oh, that is a consistent problem. And one of the regulars in the chat, my friend Alex, does play FF14. So there's a lot of times where if there's a problem, he goes, oh, yeah, I hate that fight. and it's like, okay, so Titan's a problem no matter what. Good to know. Good to know. But I got to deal with Final Fantasy 11 first. I may just play it for a month and then move on. I think that's the current plan, just doing a showcase and off we go.
I mean, that works. Of course, you can reach us in a variety of places. We are a Certain POV podcast. We are on certainpov.com, where there's a ton of other incredible podcasts. We have a Discord server. You can find a permanent invite link to the Discord server to talk about this podcast, others, games, TV, movies, books, anything really you want that's nerdy. We have tons of great conversations going on. That link is also at certainpov.com. And then you can find us on Twitter. We are at Fun and Games Pod there. We are at Fun and Games Pod on Facebook. We were at funandgamespod@gmail.com for an email. If there is a topic you want us to cover, shoot us an email. If there's a guest you want us to have, please connect us. Shoot us an email. We're also always looking for episodes of Side Quests, the side series that we've been doing for a very long time, which is weird to say out loud as it's been happening for almost a year at this point.
Yeah, it has.
If you would like to do an episode of Side Quests, there is no requirement other than you have a decent microphone and you let me know in advance what game you want to do so I can make sure it's not already being covered. You can send those suggestions and requests as well to funnygamespod@gmail.com.
And you can let us know through Gmail, through Twitter, through Discord, what you thought of this episode, what you thought of previous episodes, as well as what are your favorite social mechanics? Who are your best friends in games? Who do you wish you could or could not romance? What are all of the big and little things about the social mechanics and consequences within games? Because we want to hear from you. This is a conversation. Thank you for being a part of it. I'm Geoff Moonen.
And I'm Matt, a.k.a. Stormageddon.
And happy gaming.
Hey there, Screen Beans. Have you heard about Screen Snark?
Rachel, this is an ad break. They aren't screen beans until they listen to the show.
Fine. Potential Screen Beans. You like movies and TV shows, right?
I mean, who doesn't? Screen Snark is a casual conversation about the movies and television shows that are shaping us as we live our everyday lives.
That's right, Matt. We have a chat with at least one incredible guest every episode, hailing from all walks. We've interviewed chefs,
writers, costumers, musicians,
yoga teachers, comedians, burlesque dancers,
folks in the film and TV industry,
and more.
We'd be delighted for you to join us every other Monday on the Certain POV Podcast Network.
Or wherever you get your podcasts, fresh and tasty off the presses.
What? That's not.
Can I call them screen beans now?
Fine.
Screen beans.
So tune in and we'll see you at the movies or on a couch somewhere.
'Cause you're all screen beans now.
You will be mine.
CPOV. CertainPOV.com.